Welcome, everybody, to week 4 of online education. I hope that you guys are holding up okay and that as we transition into this last week before Easter vacation, you're finding joy in certain areas. In fact, that's kind of what our starter activity is. Some of you guys might be struggling. If so, I'd be interested to hear kind of some of the areas that you're finding uniquely challenging. If you're doing well, if this transition has gone fairly well, what are some of the areas that you're enjoying, even about being able to stay at home or things that you're able to be a part of, even while staying home? So, again, one side or the other, I guess for some of you, you might be right in the middle, but as you think about the state of the state, how would you say or describe how you're doing? As we wrapped up last week, we talked about kind of this transition time following the end of the First Crusade. Godfrey and the rest of Christianity had gone in and defeated the Muslims that had hunkered down in Jerusalem. But now, as we transition away from that First Crusade, we talked about the different orders of knights. We talked about kind of what was going to happen with the knights that were left over that basically decided to stay. But now we're also going to transition into the post First Crusade world, which unfortunately is not going to be very friendly or kind to Christianity. Whereas they probably felt pretty good about themselves following the end of the First Crusade, and rightly so. After this, you're going to see Christianity, unfortunately, losing each of the subsequent crusades. It doesn't mean that they're not competitive. It doesn't mean that they are not in them and trying to win back Jerusalem, but overall, they're not going to be very successful. The one that we're seeing in front of us is going to be the Second Crusade. It's this window, if you've ever seen the kingdom of heaven, this is the time that it's describing, the time in between the first and the second crusade. In fact, you see one of the main characters, the general Saladin, portrayed in that story. I don't know if any of you have seen Kingdom of Heaven. I think that there's some kind of unique, how can I put this? Unique takes on certain parts, but it is interesting getting to see medieval warfare. You've got trebuchets, you've got battering rams, you've got siege towers, a lot of things that are going to be part of medieval warfare that are pretty cool. But Saladin here is going to commit him and himself, the rest of the Muslim army, to being able to take back Jerusalem. And in 1187, they're able to do that. They're going to defeat the Christian general who has been given the task, an enviable task, of defending Jerusalem at this point, because they're going to lose. Christianity is going to fall, at least in terms of controlling Jerusalem, in 1187. A guy by the name of Guy of Luxembourg is going to now take over and conquer, be defeated by the Muslims in 1187. Saladin going to be the one to do that. Muslims are going to be in control. You're able to see again that it is fairly quickly after the Christians say, we want to now take back Jerusalem. And so the guy on the bottom, a guy by the name of Richard the Lionheart, is going to take on the responsibility of conquering the holy city of Jerusalem, winning it back for Christianity. Unfortunately, you're going to see Christianity yet again falling. However, there is some positive. Instead of just merely losing and having to go home with their tail between their legs, you're going to see Christianity winning the right, the ability to go on pilgrimages to Jerusalem. That was something that people still very much valued. And so, as a result of, even though they lost, having some type of compromise coming out of the Third Crusade, now Christians could go back on pilgrimage to Jerusalem. There are going to be 4 more crusades, and probably even smaller crusades, even that would make that number increase. In fact, one of them was led by kids. The Pope believed that he had a vision that kids were going to be the soldiers that would take back Jerusalem, and you can imagine how well that went. Some of you saying, Mr. Harrod, I'm feisty, I'm ready to go fight. But in terms of going up against battle-hardened soldiers, it would not go very well. But as a result of these crusades, Islam is still the one in charge or controlling of Jerusalem. I want to talk about a few of the impacts, and then we'll turn our attention to education as we tie up this first part of this lesson. First of all, I think that this is a significant moment for the rest of Europe. So much of their awareness and focus had been contained within Europe. Now, as we see them traveling to the Middle East, seeing what else is out there, there's going to be a much broader connection for them and an understanding of what the world contains. We're also going to see trade beginning to grow as we've seen not only by way of foot traffic, but even boats, people moving toward this region. There's going to be many more new networks of trade that are established, allowing Europe to have other trade partners as a result of the Crusades. Finally, there is going to be a fair amount more tolerance that's going to exist between Islam and Christianity. Even though they've been fighting for these many years, I think that at the end of it, they say there's going to be a coexistence. That doesn't mean that they think that the other side is correct or right in their belief. However, they are going to say, we will give you an opportunity to kind of coexist here. However, what's sad is even in the midst of all of this, even as they strike some type of compromise with Islam, Judaism and the Jews are still going to be fairly despised by Christianity. What's ironic is it seems that there's more in connection, more history with Jews, maybe even than Islam. But at this point, Islam is still going to be closer, or at least relationally, for Christianity than Judaism is. Well, we're going to now turn our attention to education in the Middle Ages. I'm sure it must be kind of ironic studying about learning while learning, but we're going to just tackle one slide and then we'll kind of create a barrier here or a break, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about what's going to be studied during the Middle Ages. As a result of this time, many of you are aware one of the other names for this window is going to be the Dark Ages. That isn't to say that there's going to be less light or the sun is going to shine somehow less brightly. We are going to see learning, though, being at a minimum. Even the monks that should have been the ones teaching or educating are going to be very much uneducated, at least in comparison to those that had gone before them. As we talked about Charlemagne toward the beginning of the Middle Ages, we talked about one of the things that he's going to set out to do. He says, we're going to now commit our resources, our money, our efforts to bringing about education within the empire. You guys will remember that was called the Carolingian Renaissance. As a result of this, one of the main things that's going to begin to be a topic of conversation is this idea of faith versus reason. Where do you draw the line? Or is there going to be a line? One of the things that as you look at this, there were several that began to speak out, but they said kind of if we want to pursue education, is that going to be at the detriment or losing faith? Or if we are going to be completely sold out with our faith, does that mean that we obviously need to be uneducated? And I think a lot of people came to the point where they said, no, there needs to be some happy medium. But this was going to be one of the main challenges going on back and forth. One of the guys that said there doesn't necessarily need to be tension existing here is a guy by the name of Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas. He says to be educated, to have learning in place, doesn't mean that one needs to sacrifice their faith. In fact, those two should go hand in hand. Instead of it being one or the other, they should be very much coexisting in a person because God gave us a brain to think. God gave us a sense of reason where we can now think through different topics. And Thomas Aquinas said we ought to, instead of denigrating or putting that thing down inside of us, we ought to celebrate. We ought to say this is something that's going to be important. Well, when we come back, we'll talk about some of the ways that that education then is going to work out as we think about different topics of study. The way that that's going to now be played out within society should be good. See you guys soon.